My son proposed to his girlfriend on Christmas Eve, right there in our living room, with the whole family watching. I cried. I'm not ashamed of that. I stood there with a glass of eggnog in my hand, and I cried like an old fool because I thought, finally, everything I worked for meant something. That was 3 years before I found out he'd been trying to kill me. I'm 68 years old. I spent 41 years as a high school history teacher in Dayton, Ohio. I coached JV baseball for 22 of those years. I drove a used Buick until the wheels practically fell off because I wanted to put money away. Money for my kids, money for my wife's retirement, money so nobody in my family would ever have to scramble the way my father scrambled. I wasn't a rich man, but I was careful, and I was proud of what I'd built. My wife's name is Lorraine. We've been married 43 years. She's a retired school nurse. She's the kind of woman who notices everything. The kind who will look at you across a crowded room and know, before you do, that something's wrong. I used to tease her about it. Said she had radar. I wasn't wrong. My son's name is Nolan. He's 41 now. When he was 7, he used to climb into bed between us during thunderstorms. When he was 17, he drove me to the emergency room at 2 in the morning when I had chest pains, sat in that waiting room alone for 6 hours, wouldn't leave. I thought I knew who he was. I thought I'd raised a good man. I also have a daughter. Her name is Becca. She lives in Portland, teaches kindergarten, calls me Epi Sunday. She's not part of this story, except that she's the one who held her mother while her mother fell apart. She deserves to be mentioned for that. The chest pains I mentioned from when Nolan was 17. Those were a preview. My heart has always been my weak point. I had a minor cardiac event at 53, another one at 61. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that I take medications. Have for years. Beta blockers, blood thinners, a couple of others. My cardiologist is a cautious man named Dr. Featherstone. He adjusts my dosages every 6 months or so based on blood work. I know my own pill bottles the way some men know the stats on their favorite baseball team. I've had to. Nolan and his wife Melinda moved back to Dayton 4 years ago. She got a job managing a dental office nearby, and he'd been doing remote consulting work. They bought a house 12 minutes from ours. At the time, I thought it was the best thing that had happened to our family in years. Lorraine was thrilled. She'd missed him. We both had. He'd been out in Denver for almost a decade, and before that, grad school in Atlanta. It felt like getting a piece of her life back. He started coming by on weekday mornings. Said he liked the quiet before his conference calls. He'd have coffee with me. We'd talk. Baseball, local politics, whatever documentary I'd been watching. Sometimes he'd bring the pills I'd accidentally left on the counter the night before. He knew which ones I took in the morning. I'd mentioned it once, maybe twice. He was being helpful. That's what I told myself. I want to say I noticed something. I want to say there were signs I picked up on. But I didn't. Not once. Not a flicker. Lorraine noticed. She didn't say anything to me right away. She told me later she needed to be sure, that she was terrified of being wrong. You don't walk up to your husband and say, "I think our son is poisoning you," without being absolutely certain. She knew that if she was wrong, I'd never forgive her. And if she was right, I might not be able to survive it. It started with the pill bottles. One afternoon in late October, she was straightening up my bedside table while I was out raking leaves. She picked up one of my bottles, the beta blocker, and something felt off. The bottle was lighter than it should have been for how recently it had been refilled. She didn't say anything. She started paying attention. She bought a small digital postal scale at the dollar store. Every time I got a refill, she'd weigh the bottle. She kept a little notebook. Dates, weights, how many pills should have been there based on my dosage. Over 6 weeks, the numbers didn't add up. Pills were disappearing faster than I was taking them. She checked the trash one evening when I was asleep. Nolan had been by that morning. There was a small paper bag, the kind you get at a pharmacy, crumpled under some newspapers. She smoothed it out. It was from a pharmacy, 2 towns over. Not the one we use. The receipt was still inside. It was for a refill of my exact beta blocker. My name wasn't on it. She sat in the kitchen for 2 hours that night. Alone. I was 20 feet away in the bedroom, asleep. She didn't wake me. She told me she kept asking herself, what if she was reading it wrong? What if there was an explanation? Nolan was her son too. She'd nursed that boy through chickenpox, through a broken arm, through a breakup in college that left him not eating for a week. How do you look at that person and believe they're capable of this? But she kept thinking about the scale. The numbers don't lie. The next morning she called Becca, not to alarm her, just to talk it through with someone who wasn't me. Becca listened. Then Becca said very quietly, "Mom, you already know." That's when Lorraine made an appointment with Dr. Featherstone's office. Not for me, for herself. She asked to speak with him privately. She told him what she'd found. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said he needed to see me as soon as possible for blood work beyond my normal panel. I went in that Friday. I thought it was a routine follow-up. Lorraine sat in the waiting room. She'd told me she just wanted to come along, keep me company. I didn't think anything of it. Dr. Featherstone ordered a comprehensive toxicology screen along with my usual labs. He told me he was trying out a more thorough monitoring approach for patients on long-term cardiac medications. I believed him. 3 days later, he called me back in. Lorraine came with me again. He shut the door. He sat down across from us, and the look on his face told me before he opened his mouth that this wasn't routine. He explained that the blood work showed something called digoxin, a cardiac medication I was not prescribed, at a level that, sustained, would have caused a fatal arrhythmia. He also found my beta blocker at nearly double the therapeutic dose. I didn't understand at first. I asked him if there could be a mistake. He said he'd run the panel twice. I looked at Lorraine. She was looking at her hands. That's when I knew she'd already known, and I knew she protected me from knowing until there was no way around it anymore. I don't have a word for what that moment felt like. People use the phrase, "the floor dropped out." That's close, but not quite right. It was more like gravity reversed itself, and I couldn't tell which direction was down. My son. My boy who sat in a hospital waiting room for 6 hours at 17 years old because he couldn't leave. Dr. Featherstone gave us privacy. He stepped out and said he'd give us 15 minutes. I sat there and I didn't speak. Lorraine reached over and put her hand on mine, and I noticed she was gripping it harder than she probably realized. Neither of us cried. Not then. I thought about the money. My father-in-law had passed 18 months earlier, and Lorraine had inherited a modest amount, about $200,000. It was sitting in a joint account. We'd talked about using some of it to help Nolan and Melinda with a down payment on a larger house. Nolan had brought it up twice. We hadn't said no. We'd said we'd think about it. I also thought about the life insurance policy. It was from a policy I'd held since my 30s. It had accumulated to a sizable amount over the decades. Nolan was a named beneficiary along with Becca, split evenly. I sat in that doctor's office, and I did the arithmetic I never wanted to do about my own son. Lorraine and I went home. We didn't call him. We didn't call anyone. We sat in the kitchen for a long time. I made coffee I didn't drink. She ate half a cracker and put the rest down. I said, "How long have you known?" She said, 6 weeks. I needed to be sure. I asked her how she managed to sit across from him at Sunday dinner, how she smiled at him, how she handed him the serving bowl of mashed potatoes while knowing what she knew. She said, "I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? If I'm wrong, I've destroyed our family, so I had to be right first." We agreed on 3 things that night. We would not confront him, we would not warn him, and we would fix my medications immediately. Dr. Featherstone was already managing that, and we would document everything before we contacted the police. We spent the next 8 days gathering what we had. Lorraine's notebook, the pharmacy receipt, Dr. Featherstone's records. We hired a private investigator, a woman named Stacy, 50-ish, sharp, no nonsense, through a firm our attorney recommended. She found that Nolan had visited 3 different pharmacies in the surrounding counties using a medical professional's DEA number that had been obtained fraudulently. She found searches on his laptop, obtained legally after the case moved forward, for digoxin lethal dose, cardiac medication overdose detection window, and how long does beta blocker toxicity take to present symptoms. He'd also searched, twice, for the terms of my life insurance policy. On a Thursday morning, 2 detectives came to Nolan's house. Lorraine and I were not there. We were at Becca's. She'd driven up from Portland the day before. We sat in Becca's small apartment, the three of us, and waited. When Lorraine's phone rang, it was our attorney. He said, "They have him." Becca held her mother. I walked to the window and looked out at a street I didn't recognize, and thought about a 7-year-old boy in a thunderstorm, and I didn't know what to do with any of it. Nolan's first move, and this is the part that still turns my stomach, was to tell the detectives that Lorraine had done it, that she was the one who'd been tampering with my medications. He said she wanted me dead so she could have the inheritance to herself. He said it calmly, apparently. He had a story prepared. It fell apart in about 40 minutes. Because Lorraine had the notebook. Because Lorraine had been the one to contact Dr. Featherstone. Because Lorraine had been the one to gather every piece of documentation before anyone was accused of anything. The investigator's report, the pharmacy records, the search history. Melinda, his wife, didn't know. That became clear during the investigation. She was devastated in a way that I believed, because it was the same devastation I felt, and you can't fake that kind of broken. She left him before the trial. I don't blame her for any of it. The trial lasted 4 days. The defense argued that the digoxin levels were ambiguous, that I might have been taking supplements that interacted with my medications, that the pharmacy records were circumstantial. The jury took 6 hours. They came back guilty on 2 counts, criminal administration of a toxic substance and attempted murder in the 2nd degree. He was sentenced to 22 years. I haven't seen him since the day of sentencing. He looked at me from across the courtroom, and I looked back, and I don't know what I expected to see. Remorse, maybe, or the boy I used to know somewhere behind his eyes. I didn't see either. I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. People have asked me since then whether I'm going to forgive him. Pastors, a therapist I saw for a while, a few well-meaning neighbors. It's a question I've turned over a lot. I think forgiveness gets talked about like it's a door you walk through and come out the other side clean. I don't think it works like that. I think it's more like a long road you walk down, and some days you make progress and some days you don't, and you don't ever really arrive anywhere. You just keep walking. What I know is this. Lorraine saved my life. Not in a dramatic action movie way, in the way of a woman who weighed a pill bottle on a postal scale while her husband raked leaves in the yard. In the way of a woman who kept a notebook for 6 weeks because she needed to be sure before she broke our family's heart. In the way of a woman who gripped my hand in a doctor's office and didn't let go. I bought her flowers the week after sentencing. Just the ones from the grocery store, the kind wrapped in plastic. She put them on the kitchen table and looked at them for a while and then said, "You know, I noticed the bottle was too light." That's all I did. I told her that was everything. She shrugged the way she does when she doesn't want to make a big thing out of something. Then she put the kettle on. We retired our joint account and set up a trust with Becca as executor. We had new beneficiary designations drawn up on every account we hold. We changed our locks, though Nolan had never had a key. We'd never thought to give him one, which I now realize was one of the few unconscious things we did right. We started taking evening walks. Just around the neighborhood, nothing strenuous. Dr. Featherstone's orders. Lorraine wears her good sneakers. I bring the dog, a 14-year-old beagle named Pudge, who moves about as fast as I do these days. We walk and we talk, or we don't talk, and sometimes I'll look over at her and I'll think about 6 weeks. 6 weeks, she carried that alone. I've had 2 years of clean blood work since then. My cardiologist is cautiously optimistic. My heart, it turns out, is still working. I want to say something to anyone listening who might recognize a piece of this story in their own life. Maybe it's not this dramatic. Maybe it's something quieter. Money that doesn't add up. A relative who shows unusual interest in your health. A situation that doesn't feel right, but you can't name why. Listen to that feeling. Write it down. Don't talk yourself out of it because the answer is too terrible to be true. The terrible things don't announce themselves. They come in on weekday mornings with a cup of coffee and a smile. And the people who love you, the ones who notice the pill bottle is too light, they're the ones worth everything. Every single thing. Looking back, I see what I missed. I see the questions I didn't ask, The convenience I didn't question. I was a history teacher for 41 years. I spent my whole career teaching kids to interrogate the past, to ask who benefited, to look for what wasn't being said. I couldn't do it for my own life. Maybe that's the most honest thing I can tell you. The day you stop assuming the people closest to you are exactly who you believe them to be isn't a failure of love. It's just wisdom arriving late. I wish it hadn't cost as much as it did. But I'm still here. And every morning, I take my pills, the right ones, the right dose, and I sit in the kitchen with Lorraine, and the dog sleeps under the table, and the light comes in through the window over the sink. And it's enough. It really is. That's my story. I hope you never need it, but I wanted you to hear it anyway. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any abstract way, just in the plain, practical sense of how one thing leads to another, and how the choices a person makes, quietly, over time, shape everything that comes after. Nolan didn't become who he became overnight. I see that now. There were years of me handing him things without asking him to earn them. Years of me absorbing the consequences of his mistakes so he wouldn't have to feel them. I thought that was love. I think now it was something closer to avoidance. I didn't want to see who he might be if I stopped protecting him from himself. That's not guilt talking. I'm not interested in tearing myself apart over it. But I do think the truth of it matters. When you refuse to let the people you love face real consequences, you don't protect them. You just delay the reckoning, and you make it bigger in the process. Nolan spent years learning that there was always a cushion underneath him. He stopped being able to imagine a world where there wasn't one. That's on both of us. But the choice to pick up a bottle of digoxin and start putting it in his father's system, that choice was entirely his own. I want to be clear about that line, because I spent a long time trying to blur it. Lorraine's part in this is something I come back to constantly. Not just that she saved my life, though she did, plainly and without drama, but how she saved it. She didn't act on feeling alone. She made herself be sure. She bought a cheap scale. She kept a notebook. She waited 6 weeks while carrying something that would have broken most people in 6 hours. That's not just love. That's discipline. That's a woman who understood that being right mattered more than being fast, and that the truth would either hold up or it wouldn't. But either way, she needed the truth before she did anything else. I've tried to learn from that. At 68, I'm still learning things from my wife. What I want to say to anyone who's carrying something similar, a suspicion they can't prove, a situation that doesn't add up, a relationship that looks fine from the outside but feels wrong in the quiet moments, is this: your instincts are data. Don't dismiss them, because the answer they're pointing to is one you don't want to accept. Write things down. Find someone with the right expertise. Let the evidence tell you what's true. Don't let the desire to be wrong talk you out of the need to find out. Intelligence isn't knowing a lot of things. It's being willing to look at the things that scare you and ask honest questions about them. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's Lorraine, sitting alone in her kitchen at midnight, smoothing out a crumpled pharmacy bag, and deciding she needed to know the whole truth even if it cost her everything. And integrity is what keeps you from walking away from that moment just because walking away would be easier. Warren is still here. The dog is still slow. The light still comes in over the kitchen sink every morning. It's enough.